For 3 decades, he was the biggest mystery in one of America's most baffling cold cases. His estranged wife's car was found at the bottom of a ravine, but police knew right away this was no accident. They called it a staged murder. He was the last person to see her alive, and then he went silent. For 30 years, his silence felt like a confession to some and an agonizing puzzle to others. While he was never charged with a crime, a civil court jury found him liable for her death, but the criminal case went cold. Now, the story he told, the one that finally broke his decades of public silences, being examined. So, why did he never talk about her death? Until the cameras started rolling for a national television show. On May 14, 1991, in the small town of Vidor, Texas, 34-year-old Kathy Page was found dead in her car, which was discovered in a ditch just 100 yards from her home. To the outside world, Kathy's life seemed almost perfect. She was a mother to 2 young daughters and a waitress at a popular restaurant in nearby Beaumont. She was married to Steve Page, and they'd been together for nearly 13 years. But behind closed doors, their marriage was falling apart. According to Kathy's sister, Sherry, the relationship was rocky, and Kathy was planning to file for divorce, relieved to finally be moving on with her life. Steve Page later admitted they had drifted apart and had even discussed separating so Kathy could, as he put it, find herself. Just before her death, Steve had moved out, though he insisted their relationship was still friendly. This frayed and fractured relationship would soon become the focal point of a murder investigation, as the idyllic family image was about to shatter forever. In the early morning of May 14th, police responded to what looked like a minor car wreck. Kathy Page's car was nosed into a ditch, but the scene was strangely clean. The car had very little damage, and inside, soft drink cups were still sitting upright, completely unspilled. Kathy was in the driver's seat, but she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and her body hadn't been thrown forward. Her feet were pushed back against the seat, not stretched toward the pedals. To Detective Sergeant Ray Mosley of the Vidor Police Department, it was obvious that this was a staged scene, not a real accident. The autopsy would later confirm their suspicions. Kathy Page had been strangled to death. When police went to the Page home, just a stone's throw from the site, they were met by her husband, Steve. The detective on the scene immediately found his behavior odd. When told his wife wasn't home, Steve allegedly looked directly down the street toward her wrecked car. Inside the house, his grief seemed staged. He would throw himself onto the couch, crying, but would then pop right back up with no visible tears. His actions only got more suspicious. When Kathy's family arrived, her mother witnessed Steve doing laundry at 6 a.m., just hours after being told his wife was dead. The next day, he was seen cleaning a spot on the carpet, claiming it was a grease spill. Most alarmingly, he refused to let police search the house without a warrant, a move that stalled the crucial first hours of the investigation. In those critical moments, Steve Page's bizarre behavior and his refusal to cooperate painted a target squarely on his back. By July 1991, Vidor police had officially named him their prime and only suspect. As investigators started digging, the timeline of Kathy's last night became a tangled web. Steve Page told police he was home babysitting their daughters while Kathy went out to meet a female friend around 11:15 p.m., but that wasn't the truth. Authorities learned that Kathy had actually spent the evening with a secret boyfriend at a motel. Her boyfriend admitted to the affair and passed a polygraph test, which seemed to clear him of any involvement. But the autopsy revealed another shocking twist. It showed that Kathy had been with 2 different men shortly before her death. One of them had undergone a vasectomy. Her boyfriend had not, but investigators soon discovered that her estranged husband, Steve Page. This revelation forced Steve to change his story. He then admitted that he and Kathy had been intimate before she left the house that night. To Kathy's family, this claim felt impossible. Her sister found it unbelievable that Kathy would have slept with Steve right before leaving to meet her new lover. The family came to believe a horrifying theory, that Steve found out about Kathy's affair that night, confronted her when she came home and killed her in a jealous rage, before staging the car crash to cover it all up. Despite a mountain of circumstantial evidence, the case stalled. There just wasn't enough physical evidence to get a criminal conviction. For years, the case went cold, leaving a cloud of suspicion hanging over Steve Page and a family desperate for answers. The fight for justice was just getting started, and it was about to go public in a way no one could have imagined. In cases like this, public attention is everything. For years, Steve Page lived as a free man, but always under the shadow of being the only suspect in his wife's murder. He kept his silence, never speaking publicly about the case or what he might have known. For Kathy's family, especially her father, James Fulton, that silence was deafening. Frustrated with the stalled police investigation, James took matters into his own hands in a way that would capture the nation's attention. He started renting billboards along the interstate near Vidor. In huge, bold letters, the signs accused Steve Page of murder and called out the local police for failing to solve the case. One read, "Steve Page murdered his wife," while another asked, "Vidor police botched the case." These billboards were a father's raw, public cry for justice, a desperate attempt to keep his daughter's memory from fading. For nearly 3 decades, James Fulton kept his campaign going, replacing the billboards as they wore out. He vowed they would stay up until he died or the case was solved. Years later, an Irish playwright named Martin McDonagh was on a bus trip across the southern United States when he saw the signs. He described them as raging and painful and tragic, and that image of parents' grief on full display stayed with him. That experience became the direct inspiration for the Academy Award-winning film *3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri*. Through her father's relentless fight, Kathy Page's story had accidentally become a piece of movie history, shining a huge national spotlight on the small-town cold case. The breakthrough in this story isn't a hidden clue or a deathbed confession. Instead, the first time Steve Page really broke his public silence was for a television camera. He was featured on the popular series *Unsolved Mysteries*, and finally offered his version of events, a story that was wildly different from what police and Kathy's family had believed for years. Instead of tackling the suspicious circumstances head-on, Steve deflected. He claimed he was being framed by the police. He then spun a wild tale, claiming the real killer was connected to a prominent Italian family in Beaumont, which he called the Beaumont Mafia, and that he'd received threatening phone calls. This was the story he chose to tell, not one of a tragic marriage, but a bizarre narrative of organized crime and conspiracies. For viewers and for Kathy's family, it wasn't the confession they'd hoped for, but it was the first time the silent man at the center of the mystery had finally spoken at length. His explanation, however, seemed to create more questions than answers, and to many, it sounded like a desperate attempt to point the finger anywhere but at himself. While Steve Page has never been criminally charged for his wife's murder, he did face justice in a different kind of courtroom. Kathy's family, led by her father James, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him. In 2000, after 2 mistrials, a civil jury found Steve Page liable for Kathy's death, awarding her family $150,000 in damages. The standard of proof in a civil trial is lower than in a criminal one, a preponderance of the evidence instead of beyond a reasonable doubt. But for the Fulton family, it was a legal victory, confirming what they'd believed all along. Years later, Steve Page was caught on camera desecrating Kathy's grave. He was convicted, fined, and sentenced to probation for the act. When confronted, he reportedly said he kicked the flowers off her headstone because they were oh so cheap. To this day, Steve Page maintains his innocence. He continues to blame the Vidor Police Department for bungling the investigation and insists he is not the killer. The police, however, have been clear for over 30 years. Steve Page remains their one and only suspect. The murder of Kathy Page is such a heartbreaking story, and it's even tougher with so many unanswered questions. She was a young mom whose life was cut short, and her dad turned his pain into a fight for justice that inspired an Oscar-winning film. The last person to see her alive stayed silent for years, letting suspicion linger. When he finally spoke up, it was about wild tales of mafia hits and police conspiracies. A civil court held him responsible, but the criminal case is still unsolved. The billboards may come down someday, but the family is still waiting for answers. What do you think happened that night in Vidor, Texas? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget Kathy Page. If you believe these stories need to be told, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. It helps make sure these unresolved cases are never forgotten.